Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast, where we discuss natural solutions to today's worst health problems, and we've got a good one for you today. I'm Dr. Kevin Lenderman from Dr. Kevin's Wellness Clinic in South Louisiana, and I'm joined by the one and only Dr. Rob DeMartino out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Doc, how's it going? We got the holidays out of the way.
Holidays are out of the way. I'm displaced in a different office because my office flooded yesterday from a washing machine issue. So yeah, why I look a little bit different on camera, but it's okay. Happy New Year. It's going to be a great one.
Welcome to 2026, right?
That's right. Way to walk into a puddle.
Well, guys, we got a really good show for you today. We get so many questions about thyroid disorders. And I feel, and Doc, I don't know if you agree, I'm sure you do, but the thyroid is one of the most misunderstood organs in the human body, not just by patients, but also by doctors, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those that I think gets kind of like lowered on the totem pole because people believe like, well, you could live without it.
Right.
Yeah, but you're going to suffer, and it's involved in so many other systems that it just gets overlooked. And so much of it, which we'll talk about, is the way that we as doctors are taught to evaluate it. I'll tell you this quickly. The way that they taught us to evaluate it was created in 1961. They teach it exactly the same way now. They taught it 25 years ago when we were in school. They teach it exactly the same way now. We know a little bit more now. We should be doing better.
Yeah, this is one of those conditions that sort of gets under my skin because it just seems so lazy. You know, oh, your thyroid's not working. Take this Synthroid. You know, have a good day. Next, bill it.
That's if they even find that it's not working. I mean, half the time I have people come in and they say, they have all the thyroid symptoms, and then the doctor will tell them it's not your thyroid because they don't check it correctly. And then the person goes on this wild goose chase for 2 or 3 years, and then they come into our office and then we check it properly. And I'm like, are you sure it's not your thyroid? And they're like, no, they told me it's not. And you check it properly, and it's like, it's your thyroid. It's always been your thyroid. And then they get all mad, and they should be mad, but it's frustrating because now they've wasted 2 or 3 years feeling sick and, running around and doing all this stuff. The problem was staring them in the face. They just didn't do it right.
Yeah, and I think the reason that happens is really twofold. Number one is the ranges they use to call normal are ridiculously broad.
Yeah.
I think normal TSH is something like 0.3 to 5. And you could feel absolutely terrible at 0.3, but if you're 0.31, thyroid's good.
Yeah.
And so the ranges are way too broad, and they don't look at the right numbers anyway, right?
Yeah, they and really this is, to be fair, it's probably an insurance company issue, right?
Yeah.
Like they'll you run this one marker, and if that marker's off, you run TSH. If that's off, we'll run T4. And the reason that they hold them to that is just because that's what you medicate around. So if the only treatment is medication, then that's the only numbers that matter because you're going to only prescribe if those numbers are altered, right? So they're like, we're not going to pay for everything else if you're not going to do anything about that anyways. So in a weird way, I can see their perspective of it. But at the same time, 80% of the time, you could have a massive thyroid problem and those numbers be correct. Mm-hmm. So you have a pretty good chance of having a thyroid problem, even if those numbers are okay.
Right. And if they're not okay, it's really bad, right?
Well, if it's not okay, what always gets me is when patients will come in and they'll say, well, I'm treating my thyroid. Well, how are you treating your thyroid? Well, I'm taking, Synthroid or levothyroxine or whichever medication. So I say, okay, so that's hormone replacement. And I'm like, so what are they doing to get your thyroid to work? And again, it's a purposeful question, right? And everyone's like, what do you mean? But they're not thinking of it as hormone replacement. Basically, all it is it's giving you the hormone that your thyroid's not making. It doesn't address the problem. It doesn't address why it's not making that hormone. It doesn't do any of those things. It just gives it to you. And of course, that's so short-sighted. But again, their feeling is you could live without your thyroid. At some point, it's going to die and we'll cut it out, or you'll get cancer in it and we'll cut it out. So you might as well feel good now and not worry about that. Just cross that bridge when you get to it. But you'd kind of like to keep that gland if you could and have it work really well.
Yeah.
Those are options. They just don't know that.
Right. It really is a funny conversation. It's, well, I have thyroid disorder. Okay, well, what are you doing to treat that? I'm taking Synthroid. Okay, what are you doing to treat your thyroid? Well, I just told you I'm taking Synthroid. Okay, what are you doing to treat your thyroid? And patients come to this realization like, oh my gosh, I'm just replacing what a damaged thyroid can't do. I'm not doing anything to address that.
Yeah, it'll never get better. And it is significantly worse when you get into the Hashimoto's conversation, when you start getting into the autoimmune vein of that. And, it just spirals out of control, and people will suffer for incredibly long periods of time when there's absolutely no reason. And then the other big thing about thyroid is what we would consider a gateway disease. Right? It leads to other problems. That's why the symptoms are so broad, because the thyroid backs up almost every system inside of your body. So if you have a thyroid problem, like, you're going to eventually have problems elsewhere. And just like, they'll talk about like alcohol, marijuana is like a gateway drug. Thyroid's a gateway disease where it's going to lead to other problems. So with people all the time, I was with somebody the other day, said, well, I have multiple sclerosis. And so we see I have a thyroid problem. Yeah, that's separate. It's really not. Yeah. These are the same, and it was Hashimoto's, the autoimmune version of it. These are the same animal, just the thyroid problem came first. Now you have this other problem. You have to get it back then. Otherwise, it's going to become these other things, MS as one potential example.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the ultimate game in the medical field is, well, we'll just medicate it till it's time to cut it out.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. We'll medicate it. You'll feel good. But their ultimate end game is that thing is going to come out, whether the function of it stops and the tissue dies, so you don't leave dead necrosing tissue inside the human body. I mean, there's the only one procedure in the world that does that, which is root canals, which is a story for another time. But the other side of it too is if the gland turns cancerous, and there are versions of Hashimoto's that turn cancerous, and there's versions that don't, and there are versions that do. And they're like, you either get cancer and you take it out, or it just stops working and the tissue dies, and you don't want to crowd dead tissue inside your system, so we take it out. That's their end game, and none of that has to happen. But the only problem is, again, it's unfixable when you look at it through the vein of, can we fix it with medication and hormone replacement? No, you can't fix it that way.
You can't. Right. Right. It's complicated. You got to dig into it pretty deep to really figure out why it's not working. And when we talk about Hashimoto's, what Dr. Rob is talking about is autoimmune thyroid. And what that means is, for whatever reason or set of reasons, your immune system is attacking and destroying your thyroid. That's not a thyroid problem. That's an immune system problem. Your thyroid is the victim. It's like if somebody comes and mugs you and takes your purse. That's not your fault. That's the criminal's fault. And in Hashimoto's and Graves', it's not the thyroid's fault. It's the immune system's fault attacking the thyroid. So, that's seen as a thyroid problem, but we really have to look to the immune system. And even more than that, we have to look to the cells as to why that's happening. And you can catch that in our autoimmune podcast.
Yeah, we talk about that.
So I'm making a little bit simple case of it's the immune system's fault, but it really is not a thyroid problem. It is an autoimmune problem, and the thyroid is the victim. It's being beat up by the immune system.
Yeah, and the analogy of getting beat up and having those hormones not, when you give someone medication and you give them that hormone, that would be, in that analogy, being like you carry around even more cash. Well, guess what? You're going to get beat up and mugged even more if you're walking around with $20,000 sticking out of your pocket, right, versus if you're walking around with $10 sticking out of your pocket. So when you're giving somebody the hormone and you're already in this autoimmune reaction, it just makes the attack, quote unquote, so much worse, because you're forcing a process that your body is shutting down.
Yeah.
And instead of asking the question, we talk about this all the time, why would it do that? You're saying it's stupid and made a mistake, so we're going to make it do that. Most diseases and most health problems that people have are compensations. It's doing it to protect, or do something for some other reason. It's not a mistake. There is a purposeful reason behind it. And when you start changing that thought process, then all of a sudden it's okay. Why is it doing that? Again, you ask your doctor, why is it doing that? They're going to look at you blank. Well, yeah. We don't know is going to be the common answer, but that's not a true statement. We do know.
We do know.
It's just, again, what the answer is not fixable by meds, so then it falls outside of their box.
Yeah, yeah. And you guys may notice in these podcasts that we've been doing so far, there's a common theme. And that theme is your body is smart and it knows what it's doing and it doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Your body's not stupid. It's not, oh, your body's stupid, your blood pressure went up. Oh, your body's stupid, your blood sugar went up. Everything that's happening in your body is happening because your body is doing the best it can with the really crappy hand that it's been dealt in 2025, 2026, and before that. So the idea is How do we give it a better chance to do what it was genetically programmed to do? How do we get your cells to do what they're supposed to do? And that's always sort of that first driving question whenever we talk to a patient. Why is the body doing what it's doing, and how do we get it to do something better?
Yeah, and I think an important side function of this too is talking about this idea of the whole purpose of doing this was to educate, right? To try to get this education for people, because so many people I talk to, they just feel so out of control, right? They don't know what's wrong. They've been told that their body's dumb and making mistakes, or everything looks great even though they feel terrible, or whatever the case may be. But that responsibility is a bit of a scary thing, right? Because some people want the responsibility. It's like, hey, if I know what it is, then I can do what I need to do to fix it. But at other points, people kind of like this idea of like, hey, I don't know what's wrong. They don't know what's wrong. It's just been dealt a bad hand. The whole purpose of this education, and even the podcast, is to try to give you actionable things, different thought processes around what can you do about that, because these are fixable problems. I know people tell you that they're not, and then we come on here and say that they are, and that causes a whole other separate set of BS ranges going off for people. But at the same time, it's the thought process that's different. It's the tools and the ideology it's different. But you may be doing stuff wrong that's not your fault just because no one ever told you.
Right.
Right? Or half the time, half of the advice I hear docs giving is wrong.
Yeah.
Or outdated or antiquated or through the guise.
Half the time is being generous.
Yeah. I'm not definitely being overly
It's like
generous.
99.9999% of the time, the advice we've been given has been off.
It's so much that there's half the time where I have to stop and go, am I the crazy one? Like, is this ego? Like, what is this? But I'm like, is this clear? I was like, I got about 15 papers that say that I'm right here. And you start looking at, but again, it always is coming from that lens. And I think it's one of the biggest differentiations between doctors is looking at the body as a smart entity that does what it needs to do to survive, when given a bad hand, versus it's going to constantly be dumb. It's going to constantly make mistakes. And that's all disease is. Disease is just a process of aging. I was actually reading something yesterday that they said basically longevity on the highest level possible is about 10% genetic. So how long you live on the highest level is probably more like 7%, but it's about 10% genetic, 7% genetic chance. The other 90% of it is what you do in this life. So that's what the whole purpose was, to give you those things so you can make those choices to better your outcomes. And thyroid just happens so much that it is a logical place to talk about next.
One of the most interesting things about thyroid that people don't realize, patients seem to come in and think their thyroid makes thyroid hormone and it just works when it works, and then it stops working, and there's one step to it, and it's a real simple process. Your thyroid, there are several steps that your thyroid goes through to make usable, actionable thyroid hormone. It's like an assembly line to build a car. One person puts the windshield on, one person puts the headlights, one person puts the tires on. And if part of that assembly line is not working correctly, you're not going to have a good car at the end of that. And so one of the reasons why Dr. Rob spent so much time developing our thyroid panel, it's like 12 different markers just for the thyroid. Because we have to look at every single step so that we can see, that conversion didn't happen. It was working up till here and then it stopped. Or the organ wasn't recognizing that step, so now it failed the second step. And so it's a process of looking at all of the markers for the thyroid as an assembly line so that at the end of it, we can end up with usable, healthy, functional thyroid hormone. And that's the difference between looking at one or two numbers and looking at 12, is we can see where that assembly line's breaking down.
Yeah, because if the assembly line breaks down past those two markers, those are the first two. So step 1, step 2 is fine. If we lose you at step 10, they're going to tell you your thyroid looks great and you don't have a thyroid problem. And then you go at least 2-3 years searching for other problems, but it was just the problem was at step 10. And again, eventually it makes its way up to the top, but you lose a lot of time, you lose a lot of health in those ideas. And you always have to remember too, think of the thyroid is kind of like the mom, and this is with no disrespect to the dads out there who do a lot, but it's kind of like the mom of the body. Everybody else goes first. Thyroid backs up everybody else, and then thyroid goes last. So in a system now that we're seeing, like you said, in 2026, where the system is just stressed out across the board, the thyroid has to back everybody up. It's involved in your muscles. It's involved in your cardiovascular system. It's involved in your nervous system. It's involved in your immune system. It is involved in every one of these major systems. So lots of times when the thyroid goes down, it's exhausted because it's trying to help somebody over here. And it just gets tired out, but it always puts itself last as far as repair cycles. And so that's why we're seeing more and more thyroid dysfunctions. And you'll also see more and more thyroid dysfunction as our circadian rhythm, which we've talked about in past podcasts, also gets more and more screwed up. Thyroid has to regulate itself at night in the dark. It's one of the first things that happens. Go back, watch that podcast, put those sleep protocols into place for yourself. It will make a huge difference, along with the light protocols as well.
Yeah. And here's the other thing about this assembly line process too. Synthroid is step 2. It still has to be converted and go through all of these other steps for you to feel good. So if they're filling in step 2, but step 4 is failing, your numbers are going to be improving, but you're not going to be feeling better. And that's why people can go to the doctor. They go, well, your numbers are looking great. That Synthroid's working. They're like, doc, I don't feel any better. That's because there's something down the line of that Synthroid is not being converted and broken down in a later step like it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, it's like getting up, getting ready for work. You take a shower, you brush your teeth, you get all dressed up, and then you drive all the way to work. And then when you go in the building, the doors are locked. If you can't go, it looks like you were ready, right? Like you went through the whole process. You got all this thyroid hormone inside your body. But if you can't go in the building and use it, like if it can't get you into a usable form and into that cell to where it can use it, it's like having $1 million on a bank account that's frozen. Looks nice on paper, doesn't do much for you in real life. and that's and truth be told, that's going to be the vast majority of the types of thyroid problems we find in people. And that's why, they always talk about how underdiagnosed it is. And they'll say, there's probably this amount of people with thyroid problems, but most of them don't know it because their problems happen outside of what in 1961 we came up was the testing protocol. And again, we're past that now. But insurance companies fight that. They don't want you to run all those markers, right? No, they don't want you to run all that. They consider it excess. When patients come in and they have those markers run, I'm like, did you ask the doctors to run these? And they're like, yeah. I know it's the patient that drove it, not the doctor that's running
it. Exactly. Yeah. And there's other organs involved in this assembly line too, like your liver and stomach is where some things are converted. So if your liver and stomach is unhealthy, which everyone's is almost, then you could be doing everything right for the thyroid and the liver and stomach just aren't processing those conversions right. So this is a complicated process and there's just not near enough being done to figure out about all of the details of the thyroid to figure out the why. It's just really a lazy system of low TSH, give them Synthroid, go on to the next patient.
Yeah, they kind of skip all those processes. I talk a lot about, I like to read old medical journals and old medical books because before they had all the medications, they had to think about what was actually causing it. And you hear about diabetes. When you see diabetes as diagnosed in an old medical textbook, they're like, you got to make sure you check the thyroid. You don't hear anybody talk about that nowadays. Right. Kidney disease, you got to make sure you check the thyroid because your thyroid function determines how your kidneys develop when you're children. Yeah. So you don't hear anybody talk about that sort of stuff. So you like I said, because they cut it off. They say, you have a thyroid problem? That's completely separate from the rest of your body. It doesn't do anything else with any other system. Here's the medication for that. Right. Well, no, those things are always connected. I mean, there's no way that this body that does this many things in this short of a period of time is not interconnected and talking to each other. Right. That is the first logical step. There's nothing wrong with specialists because, nobody's going to be able to know everything. But that idea that this body is separate and that your thyroid wouldn't relate to MS or diabetes or kidney dysfunctions or all these types of problems is a wild leap from reality.
Yeah. Yeah, modern medicine wants to put everything in boxes because that's how the diagnosis codes work. Your Hashimoto's is separate from your IBS, and that's separate from your hormones, and that's separate from this, and you got all these little boxes. They all have diagnosis codes so that we can code each one and bill each one and prescribe each one. But in functional medicine, it's about, let's look at all of these in one box to figure out the bigger story of kind of why that's happening.
Yeah, because it's, like I said, it all comes down to trying to name it. Because ultimately, we got lazy in the fact of, well, we have a drug for this, we have a drug for that, we have a drug for this. So they don't go back in that critical thinking process and think about, okay, what caused this? This is the problem. This is the solution. You got like you said, T4 is low. We're going to give you this drug. You got diabetes. We're going to give you a separate drug. We got this. They're not going past that first step. It's just this to that to this to that. And again, a lot of that is the model is wrecked. The model is wrecked. And, it's always unfortunate because we talk about it all the time that patients are exhausted. By the time they get to us, they are exhausted. And we call it, conventional medicine fatigue, right? Like they just get beat up and they just keep checking the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, good news, it's not that.
Yeah.
So the next logical thing is to look here. But if no one tells them that, you're just stuck on this merry-go-round of feeling you get no help, and it's frustrating at the very, very least.
Right. Yeah, they're discouraged. They dislike pretty much doctors at this point. They're frustrated. And by the time they get to us, a lot of times, we have to say, look, this is a totally different program here. Like we're not doing that. We're doing something different.
Yeah.
Doc, let's get into a little bit of the science of the thyroid. I want to talk about, obviously, the T4 in thyroid hormone. Those fours are iodine. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about things like mercury and fluoride and what that does to the thyroid gland in 2025, 2026. And the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you have tyrosine with 4 iodines. It's actually possible for another metal to take place of iodine. So your T4 might not even be 4 iodines. Is that right?
Yeah, they could actually be fluoride molecules or other, because it's what they call competitive inhibition, right? So you have that tyrosine, it's a protein that these iodines are going to hook to. That's what your thyroid does. It takes this protein, it takes these iodines, it binds them together, and then it becomes active when you strip some of these iodines off. But if you look at the periodic table of elements, iodine and fluoride are right next to each other. Right, so they are the same category of chemicals. It's all lined up as what's the same. So a fluoride atom, a fluoride actually looks exactly like an iodine. So it can bind there and it will compete for that spot. And fluoride is incredibly bad for your health. It is a massive electron stealer. Actually, before we had all of the medications, and this is kind of wild, they used to give people fluoride if they had hyperthyroid. So if their thyroid was producing too much hormone, they would give them fluoride to suppress their thyroid function. And they gave them the amount that they typically find when they check our water supply. And then they're shocked why everyone's got thyroid issues. Of course, we're doing stuff about that now, hopefully on a governmental level of trying to get fluoride out of the water and things like that. But they use it as a hyperthyroid treatment. And that's why, because it will competitively bind with those iodines. And that function, so again, it could look nice on paper, but we can't test to see how much iodine versus fluoride is binding in there. You have to use a little bit of deductive reasoning and different style testing.
Yeah, that's just so fascinating. And then, a lot of the chemical exposures that we have are thyroid disruptors, the microplastics and the perfluorinated chemicals, the BPA, all of those things are all thyroid disruptors as well. And, the average American eats like 6 pounds of thyroid disrupting chemicals every year.
And
so
fragrance. Don't sleep on fragrances. When you take perfume and you spray it where?
On your thyroid.
On where your thyroid is, or cologne, whatever it may be. I mean, that is some of the most toxic stuff that you could have kind of going around. And it's a direct application on skin right there.
Yes. Bad idea. Very bad idea. And so let's get into autoimmune, because there's 2 types of autoimmune with thyroid, right? There's Graves and there's Hashimoto's. Graves is an autoimmune that makes your thyroid overactive, and Hashimoto's is an autoimmune that makes your thyroid underactive, but they're both autoimmune diseases.
Correct. Hashimoto's way more common than Graves.
Yeah.
Typically, if you find somebody who has Graves, there's a third-party problem inside the body. So the thyroid, like I was saying before, is the mom. It backs everybody up. Some big-ticket item is struggling, and the thyroid starts making an excessive amount of hormone to try to help it. It's usually something big. It's usually the heart. It could be the brain, liver is common, kidneys could be common as well as with that. But that's why, so the doctors immediately say, oh my God, your thyroid's high. We got to give you the medication to stop your thyroid from going excess. Their logic is it makes your heart work really hard because their hearts will start going really, really fast. But at the same time, you can slow their thyroid down, it takes away the heart symptoms. But now whatever problem that was trying to solve does not get fixed.
Right.
Right. So it's a short-sighted idea. You have to find whatever that third shooter problem is, right? There's a third shooter, right? There's a third problem. You got to find whatever that is. The more common finding is that Hashimoto's side of it is that the thyroid, as it's trying to play this major role in helping energy production in all of the major systems in our body, when that gets run down, the thyroid starts to get beat up. And the more our circadian rhythms get screwed up, the more pressure we're putting on with all these chemicals. Eventually, it damages the mitochondria, the energy producers inside the thyroid. And when they reach a certain threshold, and there's enough damage there, the immune system is going to look at that and say, look, it's my job to fix this. And we get an autoimmune antibody, and it's mitochondrial damage that's leading towards this. And certain patterns of that will dysregulate the immune system, like to say where it will lead into something like cancer. And certain patterns won't. But again, they look at it and they say, every autoimmune disease shortens life, statistically. Every single one. I know that's a horrible thing to hear, but it's the truth. But Hashimoto's doesn't. So they're like, whatever, not going to kill you. You're going to feel terrible, but it will lead you to a different autoimmune disease. So for 50% of the people, by the time that they find out that they have Hashimoto's, they already have other antibodies that are going against something else. Right. So it's a gateway disease. But it doesn't get a credit that it deserves for its danger because they think, well, by itself, it won't kill you, it won't shorten your lifespan. Yeah, but you could get cancer, you're going to get a different autoimmune disease, and that's going to shorten your lifespan. So it's that big, broader look about how they function. And again, those autoimmunes, like we talked about in the other ones, do have solutions, just not in a chemical or surgical model.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's close by giving us a few real-world things people can do to protect and take care of their thyroid at home. And obviously, if you've got some kind of complicated thyroid problem, what us giving you a few ticket items to do at home is not going to solve your problem. We've got to get deep into all of your lab work, these 12 thyroid markers, looking at several other things to see where it's coming from. But for those of you listening that just want to take care of your thyroid or protect your thyroid so that you don't develop problems, Doc, what would be 3 or 4 real-world tips that we could give people?
So it's funny because they're going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but a lot of the times the same things really, they're major wise. I talked about circadian rhythm a few different times. Iodine is activated by red light. Mm-hmm. Red light is most abundant in early morning sunlight. And red light is thrown off by excessive blue light. So if you have a thyroid problem and you've got your phone and you're looking at it here, remember, even if your skin's covered, even if you're wearing the blue blockers, this part is typically not. Yeah. So cover that area. Wear a scarf. You're home. Nobody cares what you look like. Wear a turtleneck. Do something. Cover that area, especially if you're shining light, especially at night. Make sure you're getting sunlight on that area during the course of the day. Make sure your sleeping cycles are correct because your thyroid, once you get into that darkness and you fall asleep, the first thing that starts regulating itself, one of the first things is your thyroid. So your thyroid, if your sleep cycle screwed up, if you're working graveyards, if you're working night shifts, or you're just doing, that is going to roast your thyroid. It will. It absolutely will. You will have a 400% greater chance of having thyroid problems if you work night shifts. Yeah. So those, again, we talked about some of the things. Watch your chemical intake. Don't spray stuff directly on your throat. Don't slather those things. Those things are massively important when it comes down towards thyroid function. And nobody ever talks about them. They just jump right into the hormone replacement side of things. So those are some free, very basic things to do.
Yeah.
But I always laugh because people are like, oh, I'm really obsessive about blocking blue light at night, which is great. But they still use devices. They still do things. And this spot is usually the one place that they don't aggressively block.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. But if you look at just take someone's average 1-year time frame and add up how many minutes they're shining blue light right onto their thyroid, it's astounding how much blue light they get shining right here on their thyroid gland, because you've got to shine it that direction to see it.
And
I
as
never
the
thought
screens
about
get
that.
bright,
Doc.
and
That's
well, I'll tell
amazing.
you, one of the other big ones too is those wearable watches, those wearable EMF devices that track your heart rate, all that sorts of stuff. I've tested it. I've done it to the hilt. All of the nerve points that control your thyroid also run down to your wrist. So when you wear one of those Apple watches or any, I'm not picking on them, but any of the brands of watches there, and you run testing, their thyroid lights up as it's under stress. Get any wearable EMF devices. I know you wear it to measure stuff. That's great. But you got to take that stuff off. It will roast your thyroid, especially if it's on your wrist.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a patient that was asking me about one of those rings, those, what are they
Aura
called?
rings,
Nuvo
yeah.
rings or whatever. Yeah. And, he was all excited because we could measure his metrics. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, but just take it off at nighttime. Wear it to measure yourself and then take it off.
It's like anything else, right? You do this test for a little bit of time and then you stop. You don't have to
then get
do
rid
it
of it.
every single night, right? Like do the right things, test at certain intervals. It's not meant to be worn 24/7. And the more that we get into this wearable technology, the more of these problems that we have. And if it's on your wrist, your thyroid's the target.
Man, today was fascinating, Doc. This was great. There's so much misinformation out there about thyroid. I'm glad we're able to hopefully dispel some of it today, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, guys, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you catch next week's podcast. And, Doc, thanks once again.
My pleasure. Have fun.
We'll see you guys next week.